Hi, and welcome to English-Fabule. Are you learning English? Great. Let's learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's get started.
1. Introduction. Cleopatra is one of the most famous women in history. People all over the world know her name. She was the Queen of Egypt a long, long time ago. But Cleopatra is not just famous, she is also a mystery. We think of her as a beautiful and powerful queen. But who was she really? Cleopatra ruled Egypt for many years. She was a strong leader. She was clever and knew how to protect her country. She even built an empire for a time. But she also lost everything. Her life was full of big changes, big wins, and big losses. She was a queen at just 18 years old, and people saw her almost like a goddess. Even in her own time, people talked about her, made legends about her, and admired her. She was a celebrity queen. For a short time, she was one of the most powerful rulers in the world. She even had a chance to change the future of the Roman world. Cleopatra's story is still interesting today. Writers and poets have written about her for hundreds of years. She has become a symbol in movies, books, and art. But the real Cleopatra is harder to find. The image we have of her is not always true. Sometimes we remember her for the wrong reasons. We know Cleopatra was a smart ruler. She knew how to run a country. She understood money, trade, and war. One important Roman leader said she was very good at military matters. In a time when there were not many women rulers, Cleopatra was special. She ruled alone, and she was important in world politics. She was also very rich, richer than almost anyone else in the Mediterranean area. People knew she was important. Even kings were careful around her, but history has often shown Cleopatra in a bad way. She is often seen as just a beautiful woman who used her looks to get power. This is not the full story. Cleopatra was a powerful woman in a difficult time. People have written about her based on Roman ideas, and Romans were not always fair to Cleopatra. They were often her enemies. They wrote about her to make her look bad and to make Rome look good. Also, we do not have many Egyptian stories about Cleopatra from her own time. Most of what we know comes from the Romans, and they had their own reasons for telling her story in a certain way. This book wants to show a more complete picture of Cleopatra. It wants to look at her life in a balanced way. It wants to go beyond the Roman stories and try to understand who Cleopatra really was: a powerful queen, a smart politician, and a woman in a changing world. 2. A powerful family. Cleopatra was famous, but she was also a mystery. To understand her, we need to know about her family. They were called the Ptolemies, and they were not originally from Egypt. They came from Macedonia, a region in ancient Greece, just like Alexander the Great. After Alexander died, one of his generals, Ptolemy, took control of Egypt. This was the start of Cleopatra's family ruling Egypt for almost 300 years. The Ptolemies were a family used to power and wealth. They were very rich and ruled Egypt like kings and queens, or as they called themselves, pharaohs. But their family history was also full of drama. Power often led to problems within the family. Brothers fought brothers, sisters fought sisters, and sometimes even family members killed each other to get the throne. It was a dangerous game to be a Ptolemy. One strange custom of the Ptolemies was sibling marriage. Brothers and sisters often married each other. This might seem unusual to us, but for them, it was a way to keep the family power strong and the bloodline pure, like the ancient Egyptian pharaohs before them. They wanted to keep the royal family separate and special. Imagine if your parents were also siblings. It was definitely not a normal family, even in ancient times. Cleopatra's father was Ptolemy XII, nicknamed Auletes, which meant the flute player. He loved music more than ruling, some people said. He had a complicated relationship with Rome. To be king, he needed Rome's approval. He paid a lot of money to Rome and called himself a friend and ally of the Roman people. This meant Egypt was becoming more and more involved with Roman power, a situation that would greatly affect Cleopatra's life. He wasn't always popular with the Egyptian people because of his close ties to Rome and the taxes he had to raise to pay the Romans. Despite the family's problems and violence, there were also many strong women in Cleopatra's family history. These Ptolemaic queens were not just wives and mothers. They were powerful rulers in their own right. Some even led armies and built temples. They were just as important and influential as the Ptolemaic kings. Cleopatra knew about these strong women in her family. They were examples for her, showing her how a woman could be a powerful leader. They proved that in her family, women were not weak, but forces to be reckoned with. Cleopatra came from a long line of powerful, sometimes ruthless, but always interesting women and men. This family history, full of power, wealth, and drama, helped shape the queen she would become. 3. Cleopatra's Egypt. Alexandria was the capital of Cleopatra's Egypt. It was a beautiful and rich city on the Mediterranean coast. People from many different places lived there, making it a multicultural city. Imagine a city with shining white marble buildings, a huge lighthouse that could be seen from far away, and busy streets full of people speaking different languages. That was Alexandria. It was famous for its wealth and beauty all around the Mediterranean. Cleopatra was lucky to grow up in Alexandria. She received a very good education. She was clever and learned many things. She could speak several languages, which was unusual for rulers at that time. It is said she spoke 9 languages. This helped her to talk to people from different countries without needing someone to translate. Being able to speak to people directly made her a strong leader and diplomat. Alexandria was also a center of knowledge. The famous Library of Alexandria was there. It was a huge collection of books and scrolls, maybe the biggest in the world at that time. Scholars and thinkers came to Alexandria to study in the library and the museum, which was like a university. Cleopatra learned from the best minds in the world, right in her own city. This learning helped her understand politics, history, and how to rule. Life for women in Egypt was different from other ancient societies. Egyptian women had more rights and freedoms. They could own property, do business, and even go to court. Compared to women in Greece or Rome, Egyptian women had more independence. Cleopatra was a powerful example of this. She ruled Egypt alone, showing that women could be strong leaders. The Nile River was very important to Egypt. It was the source of life and wealth. The Nile made the land fertile for farming. Every year, the river flooded, leaving behind rich soil that was perfect for growing food. This made Egypt a rich agricultural country. The Nile was also used for transportation. Boats sailed along the river, carrying goods and people. Alexandria was built near the Nile Delta, making it a key trading city. The Nile was truly the heart of Cleopatra's Egypt, providing food, water, and transport for her kingdom. It was a wonder of the ancient world, just like Cleopatra herself. 4. Becoming queen. Cleopatra grew up in a very rich family in Egypt. She was a princess, and people thought she was like a goddess. She was expected to be a queen one day. She learned many things to get ready. She studied hard and knew many languages. She learned about history and how to rule. When Cleopatra was young, Egypt was becoming weaker. Rome was getting stronger and stronger. Cleopatra's father, King Auletes, was not a strong king. He needed Rome's help to stay in power. He spent a lot of money to be friends with powerful Romans. This made Egypt poorer and weaker. When Cleopatra was 18, her father, King Auletes, died. She became queen, but not alone. Her father said she should rule with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. In their family, it was normal for brothers and sisters to marry and rule together. So, Cleopatra and her brother became queen and king. But ruling Egypt was not easy. There were problems from the start. The River Nile, which was very important for Egypt, did not flood enough. This meant there was not enough food. People were hungry and angry. Also, the government was not stable. People were fighting for power. Cleopatra and her brother did not agree. They started to fight each other for control of Egypt. Ptolemy XIII and his advisors were stronger at first. They did not want Cleopatra to rule. They forced her to leave Alexandria, the capital city. Cleopatra had to go away from her palace and her kingdom. She became an exile, but Cleopatra was clever and strong. She did not give up. She went to another country, Syria, and started to build an army. She knew she needed to fight to get her throne back. She was determined to become the only queen of Egypt, like she was meant to be. 5. Meeting Caesar. Pompey was a famous Roman general, but he lost a very important battle to Julius Caesar. Pompey was in trouble, and he needed to escape. He decided to go to Egypt. He thought the young king of Egypt, Ptolemy XIII, would help him. Pompey had been a friend to Ptolemy's father, but Ptolemy's advisors had a different idea. They thought it was better to be friends with Caesar, the winner. So, they decided to kill Pompey. When Pompey arrived on the beach in Egypt, they attacked him. He was killed very quickly. They cut off his head. A few days later, Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria. He was looking for Pompey. Alexandria was a big and beautiful city. It was rich and had people from many different countries. But the people of Alexandria were not happy when Caesar arrived. They did not like Romans. They started to fight in the streets. Cleopatra was not in the palace at this time. Her brother, Ptolemy XIII, had made her leave Egypt. She wanted to meet Caesar and ask for his help. But how could she meet him? The palace was full of her brother's soldiers. Cleopatra was very clever. She had an idea. She hid herself in a large sack, like a bag for carpets. She asked a loyal servant to carry the sack into the palace and to Caesar. It was a surprise for Caesar. Imagine a Roman leader meeting a queen who arrived in a sack. Caesar was surprised, but also interested. He met Cleopatra. She was young and smart. She spoke many languages and was very persuasive. Cleopatra wanted Caesar to help her become queen again. Caesar agreed. He saw that Cleopatra was intelligent and strong. He decided to make an alliance with her. But Ptolemy XIII and his advisors did not want Cleopatra to be queen. They had a large army. They started a war against Caesar and Cleopatra in Alexandria. This war was called the Alexandrian War. Caesar and Cleopatra were trapped in the palace. They were surrounded by enemies. They had to fight hard to survive. It was a dangerous time for both of them. They were fighting not just for power, but for their lives in the beautiful but dangerous city of Alexandria. 6. Life in Rome. After the war in Egypt, Cleopatra went with Julius Caesar to Rome. It was a long journey by sea, very different from traveling on the Nile. When she arrived in Rome, everything was new and strange. The city was big and busy, but not like Alexandria. Rome was older and the culture was different. People in Rome had different customs and ideas. Life in Rome was not easy for Cleopatra. She was a queen, but in Rome, she was just a foreign woman. Roman people looked at her in a strange way. They did not understand her culture or her power. They heard stories about Egypt, about its wealth and strange gods. Cleopatra was that Egyptian woman to them, exotic and mysterious. While in Rome, Cleopatra lived in Caesar's house. This was unusual for a Roman leader to have a foreign queen living with him. Soon, something very important happened. Cleopatra had a baby boy. She named him Caesarion, which means Little Caesar. This baby was very important because he was Caesar's only son. However, in Rome, Caesar was already married to a Roman woman, Calpurnia. This made things complicated and caused gossip. Romans had mixed feelings about Cleopatra. Some Romans were impressed by her. She was clever and powerful, and she was a queen. They knew she was rich and came from an old and important country. But many Romans did not like her. They saw her as a foreigner and they did not trust Egyptians. Romans thought Egyptians were good at tricking people. They thought Cleopatra was trying to control Caesar. They thought she was too powerful and too different. They did not like that Caesar seemed to listen to her. To Romans, power for a woman meant less power for a man. Caesar was very interested in Egypt. He saw many things in Egypt that he liked. He was impressed by Egyptian ideas. When he was in Rome, Caesar made some changes. One important change was the calendar. Before Caesar, the Roman calendar was not very good. It was often wrong. Caesar changed it to be more like the Egyptian calendar, which was very accurate. This new calendar, based on the Egyptian one, helped to organize time better in Rome. Cleopatra's time in Rome was not to last. Rome was a dangerous place, full of politics and enemies. Even though Caesar was very powerful, he had many people who did not like him. One day, everything changed. Some men in Rome, senators who were against Caesar, decided to kill him. They thought Caesar was becoming too powerful, like a king. One day in March, these men attacked Caesar and killed him. This was a big shock for everyone, including Cleopatra. Suddenly, her life in Rome and everything around her was changed forever. Caesar, the man who brought her to Rome, was gone. Cleopatra's time in Rome was over. 7. Love and War. Cleopatra went back to Egypt. Her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, was now dead. She was queen alone again. In Rome, things had changed a lot after Caesar's death. New powerful men were rising. One of the most important was Mark Antony. He was a Roman general, and he was becoming very strong. Antony needed to meet Cleopatra. He sent a message for her to come to Tarsus, a city far from Egypt. Cleopatra knew this meeting was important. She needed to make a good impression on Antony, just like she had with Caesar. But this time, she would do it in her own way, a truly grand way. When Cleopatra arrived in Tarsus, it wasn't just a queen arriving. It was like a goddess appearing. Her boat was amazing, with gold and purple sails. Perfume filled the air. She dressed as Venus, the goddess of love and beauty. It was a spectacular entrance. Antony was waiting for a queen, but he got something much more. Antony and Cleopatra started to talk. It wasn't just about politics. They found they liked each other. They were both clever and powerful. They both enjoyed life and luxury. They began a relationship, both personal and political. Cleopatra needed Antony's power to protect Egypt. Antony needed Egypt's wealth and resources. It was an alliance, but also something more. They spent the winter together in Alexandria. Life in Alexandria was rich and exciting. Cleopatra's palace was full of parties and entertainments. Alexandria was a beautiful city, full of people from different countries and cultures. Cleopatra and Antony enjoyed the city's pleasures. They spent time together on grand boats on the Nile, enjoying the Egyptian sun and luxury. In Alexandria, Cleopatra gave birth to twins. They were named Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. Alexander Helios means Sunday, and Cleopatra Selene means moon. The birth of twins felt like a sign of their strong relationship and alliance. Cleopatra and Antony were not just lovers. They were partners, ruling together in their own way. Their story was now one of both love and war, power and family, in a changing world. 8. The end. After many years of power and adventure, the end was coming for Cleopatra and Antony. First, Antony faced a big problem far away in the east. He decided to fight a war against the Parthians, a strong people who lived in what is now Iran. Antony took his army far to the east, but the war was a disaster. The Parthians were good fighters, and the Roman army was not ready for the difficult land. Many soldiers died, and Antony had to come back to Egypt without winning. This defeat made Antony weaker and less popular in Rome. Back in Rome, things were getting worse between Antony and Octavian. Octavian was Caesar's adopted son, and now a very powerful man. He and Antony were supposed to rule together, but they did not trust each other. Octavian saw Antony as a rival and used this chance to turn the Roman people against him. He told stories that Antony was not a true Roman anymore. He said Antony was too much influenced by Cleopatra in Egypt and that he wanted to become king, not a Roman leader. The conflict grew bigger and bigger and finally led to war. In 31 BC, the armies of Antony and Octavian met in a big sea battle near Actium, in Greece. Cleopatra was there with her ships, fighting alongside Antony. The Battle of Actium was important. It was a fight for power over Rome and the Roman lands. But during the battle, something strange happened. Cleopatra took her Egyptian ships and left. No one is completely sure why. Some say she thought the battle was lost. Others say she had a plan to escape and save Egypt. When Cleopatra left, Antony followed her. His army was left behind and lost the battle to Octavian. After Actium, Antony and Cleopatra went back to Egypt. They knew that Octavian would come after them. Antony was very sad and disappointed by the defeat. He felt he had lost everything. He did not want to live anymore without power and without victory. He heard a false rumor that Cleopatra was dead. Thinking he had lost her too, Antony decided to end his life. He took his own sword and killed himself. But Cleopatra was not dead. She was hiding in a tall building in Alexandria, waiting to see what would happen. When she heard about Antony's death, she was heartbroken. She knew that her time was also coming to an end. Octavian arrived in Alexandria and captured the city. Cleopatra knew she would be taken to Rome as a prisoner to be shown off in Octavian's victory parade. She did not want this to happen. She wanted to die as a queen, not as a prisoner. Cleopatra made a plan. She asked Octavian if she could say goodbye to Antony's tomb. Octavian agreed. Cleopatra went to the tomb with her loyal servants. There, she said goodbye to Antony. Then, she went back to her hiding place. She sent her servants away and was left alone. Cleopatra took a poisonous snake, an asp, and let it bite her. She died soon after. With Cleopatra's death, Egypt became part of the Roman Empire. Octavian became the sole ruler of Rome, and later became known as Emperor Augustus. Egypt was no longer ruled by a queen or a pharaoh, but by a Roman governor. And so, the long story of Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, came to the end. But even though her life ended in defeat and death, Cleopatra is still remembered today. She was a powerful and clever woman who ruled a rich and important country. She was famous for her beauty and her relationships with powerful Roman men like Caesar and Antony. Her story has been told many times in books, plays, and movies. For some, she is a symbol of romance and tragedy. For others, she is a symbol of a strong woman who tried to hold on to her power in a dangerous world. Whatever people think of her, Cleopatra remains one of the most fascinating figures from ancient history. Her legacy continues to live on, thousands of years after her death.
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.